Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Now available on Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
Oh, man, you know what? I just hit the record button. Shane and I just signed off, and I called him right back to continue this conversation, and he asked me what got me into the podcast business. You know, Shane, when I left WWF, I floundered for a long time. When I left the business, it took me 3 years to really get it out of my system. And, like I said, I think I told the story last week, I fished, I drank, and I hunted, and not necessarily in that order. Finally got out of my system. All those years later, I moved out to Los Angeles to get into some kind of entertainment business. Ended up falling in love with the reality television genre. And I'd always just kind of, had to, wanted to do something that I could still stay in touch and communicate with my fan base. And so I thought about doing a podcast because I was starting to realize what they were. And they'd been around for, 3, 4, 5 years. And so finally, the people at PodcastOne called my agent and said, hey, man, these guys want to meet with you. You think you'd want to do a podcast? Well, I'd been wanting to do one for about a year. I just didn't have the wherewithal or the impetus or, just the drive to try to work through all the technology stuff. So, hey, when they called me, I thought it was a great opportunity, and I just jumped right in. And, dude, I ain't a pro. Don't know what the fuck I'm doing. It turns out all right. But the thing about it is, Shane, it's just like guerrilla radio. People don't expect me to sound like, professional DJ, and nor do I try to imitate one. And to tell you like it is, I don't listen to my own show because I don't like the sound of my voice. So, and that's just the way it is. I mean, it's kind of like if you were to go back and watch some of your old matches, I know you're just like me. You would cringe and you'd say, Jesus Christ, that looked like shit. Or why did I do that? Or this is what I would do now. So that's how I got in the podcast business. But hey, man, let's go from UWF where we left off last week, and I want to talk just a little bit more about the impact that Eddie Gilbert had on you, because I met Eddie going through USWA real briefly, but I didn't know the guy. Was he as brilliant of a? Did he have as brilliant of a mind as everybody said he did?
I thought so. He certainly seemed it to me. I mean, he was a guy that was not blessed, to be a 6'4", 300-pound guy. Eddie was, not much smaller than that, but Eddie had grown up in the business. His dad, of course, Tommy Gilbert, had been in the business and had been around it from his time, knee-high to a grasshopper. And he was one of those guys that really absorbed it, understood it. He understood the nuances of our business, which I think are sadly missing today, that elevate something from being good to being special. And, Eddie was, let's face it, I'm sure if you saw tapes of Mick Foley and Shane Douglas at that point, I certainly wouldn't have seen the talent. It was he saw it from a mile away, and others. It was Eddie had a love of this business. I'm one of the guys. I don't know how you are, Steve. But I love the business. I can watch it 24 hours a day when it's done properly. But when I'm off camera, when I'm off at home, I don't want to be Shane Douglas. I want to be Troy Martin and do my deal. And there are those guys in the business that could spout any, like Jim Cornette could tell you on what date this match took place 30 years ago, what the outcome was, how long the match went. I don't know it that well. I'm just a huge fan of the business, huge mark, and and I came from that aspect. But Eddie, for me, will always hold a special place. I think in large part because he died so young, but also because he gave him a break in the business, and just when you go to the ring and work with him, it was effortless. It was like monkey see, monkey do.
Right.
Simon says do this, Simon says do that. And you come out not even knowing what the hell you did right or wrong, but you had a hell of a match. That was Eddie Gilbert.
Right. You said a very interesting thing here. You could watch professional wrestling all day long when it's done right. And many of your interviews, you're not real happy with the state of wrestling right now. Tell me your thoughts on today's product. And this is not a bashing session. This is you speaking candidly and us discussing what's going on. Two cats.
Well, I mean, I always preface this question with, or my answer with, it ain't the kids' fault. The kids today, I watch the kids and I think, my God, I wish I had that kind of athleticism when I was that age. I'm astounded at what they can do physically. what I, again, it's probably unfair in the sense that I grew up watching old school wrestling. So, at the time that I was watching the Bruno Sammartinos and the Harley races and, the Jake Roberts and the kid in the dressing room, working with some of those guys, I was always astounded at how professional they were when they got to the, when it came time to set the match up. You and I got the privilege of working with Steamboat. And how he used to do. He'd put a chew in, get a cup of coffee, he'd walk around for an hour, and then he'd sit us down and say, okay, here, we got it. You could see the time that he put in. He was professional from start to finish. And that was what I'd always seen in the business. When I watch today, I don't see any of the storytelling and those little tiny nuances. Like Steamboat used to tell us, it's the small things that makes the big things count.
Right.
Today, I watch the kids go out, and my God, the effort they put in, 1,000,000%. I mean, it's astounding the energy that they're putting into it. But I can watch a Honky Tonk Man match from 30 years ago and get more entertainment out of that. And again, taking nothing away from the kids or whatever, this is what they're being directed to do. I don't know with that kind of micromanagement. I'm certain that the franchise character could never have developed out of that kind of micromanagement. Like you said, you had a chip on your shoulder. When I went to ECW and Eddie left and Paul Heyman took over and gave me the idea for the franchise character, I ran with that thing, but there was so much venom in me from all the shit that I'd seen in the business that he had a guy that had 11 years experience on top, working as a World Tag Team Champ with Ricky Steamboat, who knew the business and knew everything that was wrong with it as well. And he tapped into that, and he gave me an open forum. He certainly didn't give me a teleprompter.
So your stay in down there in WCW, let's call it, when you and Steamboat were world tag teams, and y'all got those belts from Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham, I struggled to find that damn match on YouTube so I could watch it. Watched a couple of our old matches, and of course, man, when me and Brian teamed up as Hollywood Blondes, we were basically an interim tag team that they'd put together just to get guys over, and we ended up starting to get over in the process. And of course, man, we worked a million matches with you guys. And I remember working one time, and we were talking about this the other day on the phone. We were working some building in the middle of nowhere. You might be able to set the story up or tell it better than I can, but it was snowing like a sumbitch. It was just storming, and hardly anybody showed up. And I don't know how many minutes we worked, but it was a long-ass match trying just to put some time in so people can get there and they could have the other matches. Do you remember that night?
I do remember it well. It was 93, March of 93. I can't remember the exact date. A second ago I said, Cornette came in there, and I couldn't. Now here I am doing it. It was in March of 93. That was when the big blizzard came up the coast and socked everything in by 3 feet of snow. I remember driving up that night. I flew in. Steamboat was driving down from Charlotte in he had a big diesel Mercedes. And I flew into Atlanta and drove up, and we met. It was at a little building. I remember working at that one time. And I was in the back. We were on later in the show, and I remember there was no snow on the ground before the show started. At intermission, I went outside to make a cell phone call when they were in their infancy to call home to my wife and to find out how bad the snow was there and stuff. And there was about 6-7 inches on the ground already at that point. So in half a wrestling match, there was half a wrestling show. There was a 6-7 inches of snow, and about right after the show restarted, after the intermission, I started hearing like car doors opening and closing, and you could see headlights pulling away from the building. And we went out to the ring. I counted from the apron that night. There were 28 people in the ring in the arena that watched me and Ricky wrestle you and Brian. And you're right. I think we went up about 45, 50 minutes that night. That was. You guys used to be effortless to work with. That's the thing when people always ask about those days. I remember it never seemed like work. It just seemed like we were going to the ring to have a hell of a good time, and with you especially, and I'm trying to blow smoke up your ass, I remember I used to do that backward blind back body press. And when you shoot me to that turnbuckle, some people I'd hesitate for a second to make sure they were going to be there. With you, I always knew that you were going to be exactly on time. And so I just hit it and shoot it blind and never once missed it with you.
It was always a blast working with you guys because you had two great technicians. You had two white meat baby faces. You could get the heat on either one. I mean, we could flip a coin in the back. We're going to get heat on Steamer tonight. We're going to get heat on Shane because you are both in the same ballpark with just as far as the just outrageous great selling. And then as far as the comeback goes, both of you had tremendous fire. So, I mean, me and Brian were like in hog heaven. It was one of those deals where it's like, what's the card? Oh, we got Steamboat and Douglas again. It's a night off. So those are some great days. And I ran into a little political BS, at one time there, they were going to split. Well, they did split Brian and I up, and they were going to give me a singles run as a U.S. champion with Harley Race as my manager, which I really was looking forward to. And I'll never forget, I think it was down there in Dothan, Alabama, when little Brian Pillman comes up to me. He goes, "Kid, we got to come up with a finish move. We're a tag team now." I said, "Bullshit, we're a tag team. They're fixing to give me a singles run with fucking Harley Race as a U.S. Heavyweight champion." And I went and talked to Dusty, and then Dusty broke it down. He goes, "No, baby, we're going to put you guys in a tag team. It'll be great." So anyway, we got a chance to work with you guys a lot, and we had a lot of fun. What was your exit strategy when you left WCW and ended up going to Eastern Championship Wrestling, which would become Extreme Championship Wrestling? How were they able to talk you out of, a pretty good paying gig at WCW, solid company, and going back to Philly?
Well, they didn't have to. I'd already quit. I had it. I was one of those guys that never really liked the politics of wrestling, and I just never had a stomach for it. And when I hurt my shoulder, I'm forgetting what match it was, but I hurt my shoulder. I had to have a quick little surgery, an arthroscope done on my shoulder, and I was going to be off about 2 or 3 weeks. And that was the time frame when they put Ricky Steamboat under the hoods with, I don't know which one played which on which day, but it was Tom Zank and Brad Armstrong.
Right.
Played the Shane Douglas role, neither of which, they both had waists the size of a thimble, and I certainly never had that waist. It was pretty obvious. And they wanted to drop the belts, and I kept telling Dusty, just give me 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be back, we'll do it right. And they went and did that. But Steamboat, being the eternal professional that he is, if you watch the night that they dropped the belts, he jumps up and pulls his hood off, and that was his cue that that wasn't him that got pinned, and it wasn't Shane Douglas, because Shane would have taken his mask off too.
Right.
And I was at the grocery store, and a guy came. About midnight. I always go late so I don't run into Marks and stuff and slow you down. But I was walking to the grocery store, and this guy up every aisle keeps looking at me really strange. About the third or fourth time he passes me, goes, "I just saw you on a pay-per-view earlier tonight." And he told me the match. I didn't even see the match. I didn't watch it at home. And he told me, I said, "Well, that certainly wasn't me, because Muhammad Ali was only quick enough to turn the light switch off and get in bed before the light went out." I said, "I've gotten from Atlanta, Georgia to Pittsburgh in about a half an hour."
Yeah.
But it just turned me off, Steve. It was, it was just like for some way to try to make Shane Douglas look bad for whatever reason. Apparently, I was up somebody's rear end that week, and I went home and started teaching school at the time. Actually, I'm wrong. I went to the WWF. It was I went up to WWF for about a year stay after I left WCW, and went from there, quit and taught school from 91 to 93 when ECW started. And in ECW, Eddie Gilbert started the place. Well, it was Eastern Championship Wrestling. Started as the booker. He called me. I told this story the other day. He called me several times, and I was so turned off by the business. I kept saying, "Thanks, Eddie, but no, I'm not interested, not interested." And he called back 3 or 4 days later, and he bumped the price up $25 or $50 a night. And he kept doing that. And I finally said, "It has nothing to do with that. I'm just not interested in coming back to the business." And
you were that burned out. You were.
Yeah, I was, and I had a good job. My dad was sick with emphysema at the time, and I was spending time with him, and he couldn't live alone, and so I was really happy to be off the road, and I've been on the road for the better part of the last 10, 12 years, and I was happy being home, and just was in no mood to go back to the bullshit that was professional wrestling, the politics of professional wrestling. And Eddie finally said to me, "How about we let you be the lead heel for the company?" And that roped me in, because I had never been given a chance to be a heel, although Bill Watts had seen it years before, and Eddie Gilbert saw it whenever he was assisting in WCW, and they had me and Tony Ace pulling the Dynamic Dudes. So there was some thought prior to that, but Eddie was the first to give me the opportunity to do it, and that's what roped me going back into wrestling.
So you end up going to ECW, Eastern Championship, whatever it was, whatever you want to call it, ECW, and Eddie's going to be the booker, but they yanked the book from Eddie, and then all of a sudden Paul E's got it.
Yeah. I was there. I was sitting in the production meetings for the first couple weeks, and the second or third week I went back, no Eddie. Doug was there and pulled me aside, Doug Gilbert, Eddie's brother, and said, Eddie's not coming back. And I said, what happened? And he wouldn't talk about it, and then Paul started the meeting, and became pretty seamless. It just was, at that time, I was told that Eddie wasn't interested in staying, and he left. And it was shortly after that, very shortly after that, he was found dead in Puerto Rico. I don't remember exactly how long, but within months, he was dead in Puerto Rico. And Paul Heyman was building what would become Eastern Championship or Extreme Championship Wrestling.
How did the death of Eddie Gilbert impact you then, and then looking forward, or now looking back through what you went through with the OxyContin, and coupled with the fact that, Jesus Christ, I don't know how many guys that you and I both know that we were good friends with, or had worked with, or buds with, because we're in the inner circle of pro wrestling that have passed on. How does his death impact you?
It hit me pretty hard at the time because, like I said, he gave me my break in the business,
right.
and without him, I certainly would have never been seen in ECW or anywhere else with Steamboat or any place else. So, I always had a special place for Eddie in my heart. And probably would have followed just about anywhere. I was one of those guys, especially at that time, I was oblivious to Eddie having any kind of a problem. I would see him at times, be sleepy looking or whatever, but, as much as we were driving on the road, that didn't really, strike a chord in me. And I was shocked when I got the phone call because I was so oblivious to that in Eddie. Now looking back and knowing the story as best I can possibly know it, and with what I've been through, like you said, I think to myself, there before the grace of God, because, like you said, it's happened so often. It's such a recurring theme in our business that, if it could happen to him, I always took Eddie as being like a really smart guy. And so I thought, if that could have happened to him, it certainly could have happened to me and should have happened to me. So, he was, just like you said, one of the ones that's gone way too soon. The business could sort of use today.
How many times you look back, and I've talked with one of my guys that I'm pretty friendly with, and say, you know what, I could have been one of those guys, because I probably could have. I wasn't in the straits that a lot of people were, but I put myself in harm's way enough. You ever stop and think about, your boys growing up without dad? Had you been a statistic?
Yeah, it's a hell of a guilt trip, there's a huge part of it, not to sound sappy or corny and certainly anti-franchise-ish, but, I get up today, I notice the sunrise and the sunset, I smell the flowers, and I certainly marvel at my kids every day. It's like I've been given a special gift, that you shouldn't be here, and yet still are, and, I have a unique opportunity that so many of our friends and brothers don't have, so I try to make as much of every day as I can because, my mother used to say, my mother was huge on church and everything, and she used to say, tomorrow's promised to no man, and how many times we've seen that in this business. So, I try to make sure I see something special and get something out of each and every day because I'm appreciative for each and every one.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Let's talk about your best defense for the unexpected. Are you prepared if the unthinkable happens? If a medical emergency arises, Air Medcare Network provides members with world-class emergency air transport services to the nearest hospital with no out-of-pocket expenses. Join today and never pay a dime for your medical flight when flown by an AMCN provider. Insurance doesn't always cover the full cost of a medical emergency, so this is a great way to secure financial peace of mind. Memberships cost as little as $85 a year for your entire household, and right now, as a listener of our show, you'll get up to a $50 Visa or Amazon gift card with the new membership. Visit airmedcarenetwork.com/Steve and use offer code Steve. No matter where you're at in the game of life, an Air Medcare Network membership is the protection no one should live without.
Steve Austin Unleashed.
You brought up the franchise. Let's talk about the franchise. One of my favorite characters of all time, and your promos were peerless at the time. You was on such a roll, such a head of steam. How long did it take you to fully morph into that persona, having never been a heel before? A story you told me yesterday as we were shooting a breeze on the phone, you had cut a promo, I guess, as Shane Douglas down there in WCW, I guess when he had the book, and he said that was a stone-cold promo, and you looked at him like, no, I'm blonde-haired, blue eyes. I'm not a heel. I'm a babyface. So, and it's like I was talking to you on the phone as well. I mean, I always loved your babyface work just because you're so fun to work with. Fire, technicality, sell, everything. But your heels, I always took you for a heel promo too. But when you evolved into the franchise thing, full of this vitriol, piss and vinegar and disdain and arrogance for everything, dude, you were cutting some of the most riveting, straight to the bone promos that had ever been cut. Where did that come from?
A lot of it, if you fall in a pile of shit and come out with a golden horse, you can already say you're brilliant. For us in ECW, honestly, one of the biggest. First of all, I knew how to do a promo. I had quite experience in ECW, in WCW, and to some lesser extent, less spectacularly in UWF. But, so I wasn't uncomfortable with the time cues and the time, countdowns and things. I could get in and out on cue. But the vitriol that you mentioned, that it came from all the politics I'd seen in the business. And that was the first time I went to the ring to do a promo. Paul gave me 5 minutes, and then I said, what do you want to talk about? He said, whatever you want. I said, well, give me something to talk about. And so whatever you want. And so I was sort of thrown to the wolves. ECW Arena, I'll let everybody know a little secret. It wasn't the greatest arena in the world. It
was a shithole. And I say that with respect and affection.
Right, that's the same here. And but our sound system was so bad that even us in this conversation we've been having on your show, it was something I was talking on Downward, and it came through very muffled. So you had to slow everything down to make it make sense.
Right.
And that's where I sort of found my pace in that character that sort of most people, I think, would looking back on it, look at like as being arrogant or, obviously that was a big part of the character, but that came from that necessity of having to speak slowly, or it just came through as a bunch of muffled nothing on the sound speaker. And so all those things confluenced at one point where, I was full of piss and vinegar to the business and anger and vitriol, and I had the sound system that I had to work with. But I also was put in a spot as a top heel, and thankfully got Terry Funk to work with, who taught me a world about being a heel. And I just always thought it was the opposite of being a babyface. That's how stupid I was at the time.
Yeah.
And, just sort of wandered into it. And then luckily the business was going to a point where wrestling was on this huge upsurge. WWF was going to monstrous heights, and WCW was gaining huge ground. But there were so many eyeballs on wrestling, and the internet, thank God for the internet, because without the internet, ECW, I think, would have been a one-town company that, a few people talked about. But the internet and Bob Ryder, bless his heart, who would sit there and literally tap out each match. Shane Douglas just grabbed Steve Austin and a headlock. Steve Austin, he would type out the entire match live over the internet. And so had us out to a much larger audience than we could possibly have reached in those early days. And everything just sort of confluenced at one point. There was all that anger and the sound system and this position of being the lead heel and this experience and the internet, and, it was lightning in a bottle. Mix all those ingredients together and you had nitroglycerin.
You said Terry Funk taught you, or that you put two and two together, and being a heel is not just the opposite of being a babyface. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, the babyface goes out and reacts. I mean, the way we were broken into the business, the heel called the match. He was the ring general, and you responded to what he did or didn't call for you. I had become very good at doing that part of it, but, calling the match is much different to deciding what storyline you're going to tell, what's the story you're going to tell in that particular match. If you're cognizant, like I think you were and I was in the ring, making sure that you're playing off the character that you're wrestling, instead of just going out there and beating them up and doing your own thing, To me, the great matches always played off of the dynamic of Stone Cold Steve Austin versus the franchise champion, these two iconic characters. And it'd be stupid for me to go to the ring and just eat somebody up whenever I could get so much out of the character that they've taken time to build.
Right.
And that never came into play as a babyface, obviously. And Terry Funk was the one that taught me that.
What kind of pressure did you feel going into the organization, being the lead heel? Because, dude, you guys had a hell of a damn roster. And let me see if you had Raven, Sandman was there. I guess Mick was there at that time, right?
Right, absolutely.
Jesus. Name some of the other guys, because I'm going to leave a lot of guys off the list. But what I'm saying is, man, you guys had I remember my memories of ECW were groundbreaking, shocking. Some of the greatest characters of all time, I think, were created from ECW. Very violent matches, some great matches, also some highly technical matches with the Malenkos and Benoits and the Storm and those guys.
Sure.
But for the most part, it was a lot of violence. And when I went in there, I called it a lot of violent crap because I was trying to be a heel and I was calling a spade a spade. It was much more than that. But the pressure you felt trying to lead that organization with all those guys breathing down your neck, because everybody's gunning for the top spot, and you're brought in as a lead heel, but you've got to maintain that and set the pace.
Yeah. Well, that was, I mean, again, you've been to the heights that you've been with and traversing the Federation, but, for me in ECW, you said we had an incredibly talented roster. I always thought when I was a young kid in the business that when you get to a certain point, you'll relax and be able to sit back and feel, okay, I've made it. I never felt that in ECW. I was always looking over my shoulder at a Taz and a Tommy Dreamer and a Raven and a Sandman and a Sabu and a Terry Funk. I mean, there was a list, long out the door that could certainly have carried the belt and were capable. So that was in large part the reason that drove me eventually to the OxyContin. Not that it was to blame, but I was pushing myself to such an extent that I couldn't just go out and have a match. I had to have the championship match. And in ECW, the one thing that people always talk about ECW, because the fans especially today talk about it like every night was a 5-star match. Every night was a 5-star night. Every match was a 5-star match. Every wrestler was a 5-star wrestler. And that wasn't the case. So, there were a lot of stinkeroo nights, and I had a lot of them. But the thing about ECW that I was always most impressed with was no matter how good the matches were before yours, everybody always lived up to it. So if match 3 went out and tore the roof down, and Sandman was going out in match 4, he'd top that son of a bitch. And match 5 would go out and top him. And Paul's true genius is in 2 things. A, he had an incredible dressing room of talent, and he knew how to build on their strengths and negate their weaknesses. That was the first thing. The second thing was Paul knew how to build a card. So if you were on 5th match, you knew you were there. Looking back, I knew I was there because he needed something to precede to go bigger than the first 4 matches and leave the door open for match 7, 8, and 9 to follow it. And for some reason, the chemistry always worked there. And he mentioned the Kliqs earlier that were in ECW. There were those Kliqs, and there were a lot of tensions along the way with different people between different, wrestlers and talents and management, the people in the company, management and whatnot. But the funny thing about ECW was there were several nights where fans would attack somebody. The first night I remember this happening was in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Somebody attacked Dancing with Wolves. He came running back and said, somebody just called New Jack the N-word. Without hesitation, the entire dressing room emptied out, and we went out there and beat the entire room up. There's people that didn't leave. And, you think about that today and the lawsuits that would ensue. Yeah. But, I saw it. And one night I got attacked by a fan in Allentown, and the dressing room emptied out, and it wasn't like the guys that I didn't get along with didn't come out. The entire dressing room came out and formed a circle around me and protected me and got me back in the dressing room. It was a fraternity there. It was a brotherhood. And I had never seen that in wrestling. I'd heard about it from Dominic and Bruno. I had never seen it firsthand. And I never saw it again after that. It was something special there in the chemistry that was ECW.
Let's talk about the kind of the atmosphere or the us against them mentality, which Paulie, I think it was probably almost organic. I think you all felt it. Certainly, Paulie capitalized it on it. And speaking of great promos from a person such as yourself, Paulie's no stranger to a great promo himself. If you go back to his Continental days, his stuff in the early 80s, mid 80s, whenever, Paulie could cut a great promo from day one. And so, I heard about, and I've seen many of his famous, got to win one for the Gipper, it's us against the world, mentality. And he certainly stirred you guys or the whole roster. And I think everybody was going to do it anyway, but he certainly stirred the pot to get everybody to go out there and give it their goddamnedest, if I can say that, just to put everything on the line. And, man, all of a sudden, I mean, the violence, the bumps, the whole shooting match just escalates into what it did.
Yeah. Paul had a way of working us into a lather, into a frenzy that, that you could literally feel the adrenaline. Like you said, you witnessed them that would, we all knew none of us were stupid. We knew that we were a teeny tiny company that was fighting two Goliaths, that if we were going to make any kind of inroad whatsoever, we had to go big, we had to go audacious, and we had to go balls out. There couldn't be any other way. We couldn't afford one bad arena show could have spelled the end of ECW anyway along the line. So that $36,000 is what the gate was for the ECW arena every 3 weeks. Had that building not been sold out, say we shit the bed tonight and come back 3 weeks from now, it was half full, we got 18,000. That literally could have spelled the end of ECW at that point. So it was never mentioned and it was never brought up in words. We all knew it. We knew that me as the mouthpiece, for me it was, I couldn't just talk about the guy across the dressing room, across the ring. I'd then also shoot on the champions north and south and get the attention because we certainly couldn't pay for the publicity. We had to get it in other ways. And Paul, Paul's given a lot of the credit and he deserves a lot of the credit for ECW. But I think, when you look at the talent in that dressing room, anybody with any kind of sense of our business could have coached that dressing room. I'm not so certain they could have led it like Paul did.
Man, when I watched the DVD, it was called ECW Barbed Wire City. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Blue Mini, Brian Heffron sent it to me, and I enjoyed the shit out of it. But when the DVD ended and the credits rolled, I had this strange feeling about me. And it was just like, when you started going back, and you were there way longer than I was, but in its totality, man, it just took a bunch of human bodies, mashed them up and crushed them up and beat the fuck out of them, and then just, disappeared. The way the violence escalated there, Shane, in-house, organically, did the boys outwork themselves with respect to how violent the product became?
In some ways, yeah.
Because it's a work, because from when you started and training with Dom, and you're breaking in, and those, got some color, some hard ways there for Bill and Mid-South, but, the business is a work, and I know you guys are working, but, man, that was some stiff-ass shit that was going on.
Yeah, it got to the point where it was beginning to become a caricature of itself, and the injuries were starting to rack up. And I told you earlier there were guys that were refusing to work with, it's not just me. There were probably 6 or 7 guys in the back that were refusing to work with other people. It became, I'm sure, a headache for Paul to book. And it reached a point where, where a chair shot would evoke a huge response in the early to mid years of ECW. By the end, if you didn't take somebody's head off, if somebody put their hands up to try to lessen the blow or whatever, the fans would just shit the bed on you.
Right.
And that said, nobody did anything there they didn't want to do.
Right.
Paul didn't micromanage. I certainly think that we all started feeling the pressure of living up to that legend that was ECW, that was much larger than any of us understood at the time. It certainly took. I remember one night there was a night in Scranton, Pennsylvania, at the CYO, where Terry Funk was wrestling Raven, and I pulled Paul aside earlier that night, and I said, Paul, if you want this match to work, you got to be the leader tonight. Because Paul wanted to be the leader in some ways, in other ways he didn't want to. He didn't want to be the person to come tell Steve Austin, hey, you can't get color tonight, or you can't break a table, or whatever. And I said, you need to tell the dressing room before the show that if anybody touches the chair or a table prior to that match, they're going to be fired. And he didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to do it. Me and Taz and a bunch of us kept leaning on him, and he finally did it. So to the course night, the show got over very well. And when Terry Funk and Raven brought a table into the ring, you could feel the energy just start ramping up. They knew it was going to happen.
Right.
And they did the perfect, Terry Funk and Raven both did the perfect thing. They teased it for about 20 minutes. The table just sitting in the middle of the ring doing nothing. And the fans finally they'd go to it and come away, go to it and come away. Finally, about the fifth or sixth time I went to that son of a bitch, and the place exploded. Which told me that it wasn't necessary to do it 55 times a night.
Right.
They wanted to see it that one time and make it special, and it had gotten out of control at that point.
What about the? Were you there on the New Jack Blade incident with the kid?
Yes, I was there then. I sure was.
Now, from my understanding, the kid's pretty green in the business. Don't know that he really had too many matches. He wants to get color, or somebody wants to get color, but New Jack agrees to cut him. I'm under the impression there's about a 4 or 5 inch gash across the kid's forehead.
Yeah, he'd gone pretty deep and hard on the kid, but I was sitting there at the table when the kid came in. He came in with a midget wrestler. And me and Paul, and I want to say either Taz or Tommy Dreamer, was sitting at a table talking, and he came over with the midget. And I forget who the midget wrestler was. And he sat down, and the midget started talking for him and saying, this is so-and-so, and he's a good kid, and told Paul that he was experienced. And when Paul asked him if he could blade, he said he could. And now, I'm not condoning what Jack did with blade or didn't do. I wasn't in the ring for that, but the kid bled pretty badly and pretty seriously. Yeah. And, I was there when he told Paul that he was experienced. He'd been trained by Killer Kowalski, and, that he had bladed before, and, the whole deal. So, I'm certainly not saying that what happened to the kid deserved to happen, but, and I'm not trying to protect Paul either. I'm just telling the facts as they were, because the kid certainly let off that he knew what he was doing.
You decide at some point here you end up back in the WWF. What prompted your leaving ECW to make a return to WWF? And, that short run there, and you went home to take care of your father, and here you go back. And there's a change in the landscape, because seemingly when I look back, when you go back, the Kliq is in full force. And it didn't seem to me, from what transpired, and I was still down in WCW, that those guys liked you too much. What was break that down for me, because I know there's a lot of headaches, hassles, and horseshit for you when you went back.
Yeah, well, first of all, when I left WWF the first time, I was there for just a little under a year, just about a year, maybe 10, 11 months. And we were in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I sat down with Vince to tell him. And, he went into a long story about his family and told me that family always comes first. I had a hell of a hand for him, that the door's always open to come back. So when this opportunity popped up in '96, up front, I am happy as a pig in shit in the ECW. I was making damn good money. I was working 2, sometimes 3 days a week. I was home 4 or 5 days a week with my wife. Really was as happy as I could be in the business. And Vince kept calling, and Jim Ross, and different people in the company. And Jim Ross called me one day and said something along the lines of, opportunity sometimes doesn't ring twice. You owe it to yourself and your family to look into this. And so I had gone up, I think, on 5 trips on my own. And on the 6th trip, he flew me and my wife up. And the first thing, go back to the very first time I fly up there. I'm waiting in Vince's outer office, with his secretary, and he comes out and says hello. And Vince is fantastic on the cordialities and everything. And he orders a very specific breakfast. Egg white omelet, dry, no oil, fresh squeezed orange juice, coffee black, dry wheat toast. He's going, and asks me if I want anything. I said, no, I'm fine with it. I've already eaten, thank you. And he asks again, I thank him again, and we go into the office. Within 90 seconds, Steve, there's a knock at the door. His secretary brings his tray in with his breakfast on it. And to this day, I don't know if he was trying to impress me that he was like the Jetsons, that he can push a button on the wall and get his breakfast. Or she didn't have time to walk across the hall to get the tray. It had to be under her desk. Right. That's how quickly it was. And I remember that, like, thinking to myself, like, that was strange. Then we go to these other 4 subsequent trips on my own, and I don't know what it was. I didn't want to leave ECW, and I, wasn't prepared to leave. So it wasn't that I was playing him out or stretching things out. I was trying to listen to his offers, and but there was nothing there that really sunk in. And the last time, the 6th time I went up, I took my wife, and I told her beforehand. She didn't know the first thing about our business or cared about our business. But I wanted to use her as good cop, bad cop. I said, if he asks you any questions, I'm not going to tell you what to say. I want you to look him in the eye and tell him what you're thinking. And about halfway through the meeting, he said, Carla, Troy tells me that you guys share all your decisions on this. You must have some questions. What can I answer for you? And she looked at me. It was the only time in my entire relationship with Carla that I'd ever seen her be this forthright. She said, my husband is home 5 days a week in bed with me. ECW is the only company that's ever utilized him to his fullest potential. And he's teaching school 5 days a week and happy with that. What could you possibly offer him to walk away from all that? And he leaned across his table there in his office, and he patted her hand, and he said, Carla, you have my word as a gentleman. I'm going to make your husband a very wealthy man. At which point I jumped in and I said, well, I'm sure you and I have different definitions because this is before the guaranteed contracts. He said, well, we don't guarantee money here in the World Wrestling. I always like how Vince always talks about the World Wrestling Federation as like an alternate universe. We here in the World Wrestling Federation don't guarantee contracts, and
right,
et cetera. And he said, but it's not uncommon for somebody in the position we're putting you in to make a guaranteed base salary of $350,000 to $550,000 a year, plus your pay-per-views, plus your merchandise.
Dude, that's big money back in.
So I left, and I went, and I called Steamboat, and I called Sherry Martel, and I called Animal, and I called Rick Rude, and I called everybody I'd known, perfect, guys that had worked in the top spots up there, and asked them, and they said, that's what he told us when we got rich. So I let my guard down, and I signed the contract. And even while I was signing it, Steve, there was something in my stomach that didn't feel right. I think it was in large part I didn't want to leave ECW. And after I signed, we started going to this whole character development thing for the Dean Douglas character, which didn't fit.
Now, explain to me the pitch about the Dean Douglas character.
The pitch for the Dean Douglas character was Vince and he used several specific examples of guys' work. He was showing me a videotape, and he said, you can see here, Bret Hart said he's the best is, was, never will be, but he won't grapevine the leg except on the finish. And he went through about 6 or 7 different guys. He was noticing the work not being up to snuff in certain places. And he said he wanted to use the Dean Douglas character to sort of tongue-in-cheek point it out to the guys that tighten their work up. And, I certainly saw no problem with it. I have no problem with somebody pointing out that I'm doing something wrong in the ring. In fact, I prefer it so I can fix it. And he allowed me, before I signed the contract, it was that I could give legitimate grade, A, B, C, D, and F. And where the Dean Douglas character came from was I stood in the conference room with my shirt off and stood there and slowly turned in a circle, and they're looking at my resume, and they said, you're a teacher, okay, you're a dean, you're the world's smartest man, 7 PhDs. Now, stuff that, to me, where wrestling started going off that gave rise to ECW in the first place was it had gone to cartoon land. And guys like me and you, let's face it, we're not going to watch a cartoon, but we'll sure as hell go watch 2 guys beat the snot out of each other. And that's where the Dean Douglas character was originally conceived. Once implemented, there was one incident where I was doing vignettes for several months before I went on the road. And we were at the studio one Sunday on like the 6th vignette all day long, going over and over and over the wordings, the promos, and the grades, and costume changes, and makeup fixes, and everything. And on the 6th one, I had gotten done. I was just bored out of my skull, Steve, because he wanted the Dean character to speak in a monotone voice. The reason being, he had told me that he once had a teacher in 8th grade that talked like that, and it drove him nuts. Right. And I said to him, the difference, Vince, is you couldn't leave that classroom, but people today can channel surf. And this guy's boring; they won't want to watch him. And on the 6th one, I asked him if I could do the last one over again using the exact same verbiage, just a little different delivery. And he said, okay. So I did. Now, the room had, how you've been up there a lot more than me, but they had a room full of people, cameramen, soundmen, the makeup girls, the hair guy people, the Michael Hayes and Stan Lane were in there, Jim Ross was in there, you know, well over a dozen people. And I did the last one, but I did it as a franchise. Same exact verbiage, same grade, pounding my fist on the podium, laughing, scratching my hand on the board. And right as I finished it, Vince got called out of the room on a phone call. So I pulled the room, Jim Ross. I started with Michael Hayes because Michael was a pretty good stick guy. And I said, what do you think of that last one, kid? Was hot. And everybody in the room, every single person in that room, as Vince was gone, Jim Ross included, told me that the last one that I had done was much better, far more compelling.
Right.
So Vince comes back in with a cup of coffee and his glasses down on his nose, and I said, what do you think, Vince? He looked around the room and said, well, I appreciate what you were trying to do, but, and he gave a long, pregnant pause, he said, but I think I like my way better. What's everybody else think? And every person in the room who 5 minutes before told me my way was better sided with Vince and agreed with Vince. And it was that day that I realized I had to get out of there. I knew it was La La Land for me.
Right.
But, you know, you mentioned the Kliq earlier. When I went up there, my guard was completely down because Shawn Michaels and I, especially, 5.5 years before that, me, Shawn, Marty, and Dustin Rhodes, we were like the four amigos. Where one of us was, we all four were. You know, we were inseparable on the road. We traveled together, and you know how that goes when you're on the road back then together. Very good friends, very close. And Razor had traveled with me and Johnny in WCW when we were there, and you know, rarely had money to pitch in for the rental car, for gas. You know, we would always take care of it, and you know, so I go up there. You know, to me, you were my friend the last time we spoke 15, 12 years ago, whatever it's been, and you're my friend today. And 5 years from now, if something's turned around, you know, no problem. I mean, that's the way I am. And so I went up there, my guard completely dropped, and very quickly started realizing that this faction was against me. And there was an incident that happened in Montreal at the Molson Center. Pierre, what's his name, Carl Ouellet.
Yeah.
Had worked, the house was way down, had been down for several months. And he had pulled in a lot of local favors, done a lot of local promotion, and had the house way up, and they had him working on top with Kevin Nash in the main event. And it was one of the first days I was on the road. And I walked down, remember how you walk down the ramp, and there were two dressing rooms on the left. At the bottom is where the Zamboni machine was, and the Canadiens dressed on the other side of that. As I went to walk into one of those rooms, Shawn grabbed me by the shirt and said, no, you dress with us. And so I followed them down into the room. And as I'm getting dressed, right in front of me, Kevin asked Shawn what he should do. That Vince wanted a hot finish and they could do a comeback. And Shawn got up in his face and he said, no, fuck that, you're the champion. When you worked with the champion, did you put the champion over clean? He said, well, yeah, but he said, no, but. He said, you're the champion, that motherfucker should put you over clean. Jackknife, 1, 2, 3. So he turns to walk out, and as he does, Carlton's walking in. And this is happening 4 feet in front of me.
Right.
Shawn does this turnaround and comes up behind Carl, standing right behind Carl's blind in one eye.
Right.
Standing right behind Carl, and he's pantomiming behind Carl's head, Jackknife, 1, 2, 3. And Kevin finally reluctantly says that, and Carl says, no, we can't do that. It's a finish, and it's a comeback. And he leaves, and that night at the hotel we were staying at the Days Inn, they called me down into the room. As they were walking in, me and PJ were just incredible. Were in the very first room right off the front lobby. And they were walking in behind us. They said, hey, we're going to be down in the room getting pizza and beer. We want to talk to you. So I went down and they asked me, what I thought about what happened in the building. And I said, well, it makes sense. Can't do a comeback if you do a clean finish. And, I want to say it was Shawn. Said, see, I told you, Shane knows the business. That's not how we do things here. We should, you put the champion over clean here. And then there was all kind of, bad comments being thrown around about Carl. And then one of them said, let's call Vince and have him starve him for the next 3 years. It disgusted me. And it wasn't long after that because like I said, it cites on me. And I was only too happy to leave. Like I said, after the day of the vignettes and the promos, I knew that it wasn't the place for my type of character, and that I wasn't going to be allowed to unleash what I could unleash as a heel. So, I was only too happy to leave and go back to ECW.
So, what did you put in for your notice, or they just the contract expired? What'd you do?
No, I had signed a 2-year deal, and remember when they used to do Raw, they'd shoot an hour taped, and they'd go live at 9 o'clock. Davey Boy Smith was in the ring about 20 till 9, and Razor and I put my notice in and was working out a notice, and Vince wanted to work a 2-month notice or something. I kept on 2 weeks, and we settled on like a month and a half or something. And Davey Boy, remember how Davey Boy would, like, when he threw his headbutts or punches or whatever, he'd stomp with both feet.
Yeah.
And about 20 to 9, he's in the ring with somebody, and he goes to headbutt them, and he sinks to the mats up to his knees. Well, about 30 guys converge on the ring. We got 9 o'clock, we're going live, and Razor and I are the first match in the ring after we go live. So they converge on the ring, tear it down, throw it back together, but they finish it literally as the pyro's going off for the 9 o'clock start. So we go down to the ring. It's never been tested. Nobody's been in the ring. Razor did that spot where he blocks your punch, you came off the ropes, he'd follow you and clothesline you to the floor. Well, when we went to do that, I went to push, I know where the fulcrum point for the rope is with my elbow. I went to push down to go over, but I didn't clean the rope. I was balancing on the rope, and he shoved me to clear me over the rope.
Right.
As I'm going down, upside down on the other side towards the floor, it felt like he football punted me in the middle of the back. And when I went to get up, my legs, they weren't paralyzed, but they weren't going. I was telling me, I'd tell my knee to come up to my front, and then my leg was going over to the side. I couldn't get up. And the referee comes to the ropes, I forget what it was, and says, get in the fucking ring. I said, I can't, my legs ain't fucking working. And Razor came out and took care of me, honestly, for the rest of the match. Vince wanted the Razor's Edge finish, and he wanted me to small pass. I said, no, Vince wants to finish, give it to me. And he laid me down as easily as he could, but it felt like I was going to crap out my kidneys.
Right.
And I get back to the dressing room of the Richmond Coliseum after crawling on my elbows from the curtain all the way back to the dressing room, past a bunch of guys in the office and everything. No, one person said, can I help you? It's saying, look like you're having a little trouble there.
Yeah.
And I made it back to the dressing room. Dustin was in the dressing room with me, and he went to open the doors as I was trying to come in, and he went, oh shit, and helped me up and went and got an EMT. And the EMT told me that he thought I had a muscle spasm in my back, which turned out to be a broken bone in my back. And luckily my attorney had negotiated a clause into the contract. They had a clause in there that said that I couldn't sue even in cases of negligence. And he laughed at that and changed it with their blessing, saying that I couldn't sue except in cases of negligence. And so there was enough legal wiggle room that there could have been a lawsuit, breaking my back in the ring. I just wanted my unconditional release. I wanted the hell out of that place.
Gotcha.
My hat's off to all you guys that were able to make it up there, because I couldn't traverse it. I just I couldn't tolerate the insanity that was that place when I was there.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
You own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com. All right, I'm talking to Shane Douglas. He's on the move. So what was it like going back to ECW? Was it homecoming? Were things just as they were?
No, it was strange, Steve. You remember what ECW was? The ECW that most people think of. When I get back there, the Dudleys had been introduced. One black, one white, wearing glasses with no lenses and tie-dyed, and they looked cartoonish to me until I saw them work. And I was just son of a bitch, these guys can go.
Yeah.
And it was on that level. It was very much a homecoming, like putting on an old suit. It felt very comfortable. But Paul, I guess, was a little pissed at me leaving, and Paul didn't talk to me about 6 months. He'd hand me my check and turn around and walk away. And it was, sort of comical in a way, but I just was happy to be back.
So what was the deal with some of the pay shortages that I always would hear and here and there? Paulie owes this guy money and this guy money, or was it Todd Gordon, or was Todd Gordon still involved at the time? But there was a lot of missed paychecks there. A lot of people still missing money from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Towards the end, it was sort of like the inverse universe when we were wrestling in little places like Jim Thorpe with 100 people in the building, the checks were clearing. And then now we're wrestling in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people, and the checks are bouncing like rubber. It didn't make sense. But my understanding is, and I didn't know this at the time, that Todd was largely by that point a figurehead in the company. He had the way it had gone to being HHG Corporation, which was Paul's corporate name for the company, was that Todd had basically said he wasn't putting any more money into it. And so Paul went to his father and got a loan and floated the company for the last however many years that he made on that money. It was $4 million. And towards the end, the checks started bouncing, not just mine, but everybody's. And there was a lot of real animosity in the dressing room over it because the guys were working hard and the checks weren't clearing. So in my case, it got to $144,000 when I knew it was time to go. And prior to that, the night that I dropped the pay-per-view where I dropped the belt to Taz, Paul had been telling me for a year leading into that angle that I was going over the angle. So for a year, I had done this pussy backpedal routine from Taz to get him over.
Because you were going to ultimately go over.
Right. And so now to pull this rug out from under me at the last minute, and at that point, Paul would be about $77,000, of which that wasn't just money that was owed to me for matches that I had. Probably half of that was for money that I had spent out of my pocket promoting shows in Pittsburgh and West Virginia and Ohio. This is my area. So it was negative that because I was in the hole that deep, about $40,000 for what I'd spent out of my pocket. If I didn't do that, we were paying for time that we wouldn't get. For instance, the traffic department we'd have for our TV commercial would be paid for, but they wouldn't get the tape, so they wouldn't run it. So I would have to make sure I'd have to spend money to make sure that Ron and Charlie got the tape sent down on time, or pay for the TV spots beforehand, because I knew Paul would never send a check on time. Flights back and forth to different places that I was promoting, etc. So a lot of that money was money out of my pocket. And the weekend that it was for the pay-per-view, Paul wouldn't call me back. He called me earlier that week and he said something like, I've got an idea for a match this weekend. I could tell by the way he said it what he was doing.
Right.
And I tried to call him all week long and he wouldn't answer. I'd call him 5-6 times a day, no answer, no return call. So Friday, I was supposed to leave Saturday. Friday, I called him and I said, it was about 10:30. I said, Paul, at 11 o'clock, if I haven't heard back from him, I'm assuming you don't want me there, and so I'm leaving to go to the bar and get drunk. And 11 o'clock on the nose, I walked out the door and went to the bar. And about 12:30 that night, he started calling. So I answered the phone and started to hear his voice. I'd hang up, about 5 or 6 times, because nothing would piss him off more than doing that to him.
Right.
And I was pretty well into it at this point, pretty well 3 sheets to the wind. So the last time I answered, he said, "You're going to keep hanging the phone up, you're going to listen to what I have to say." So I said, entertain me what you have to say, Paul. And he told me this idea and started trying to sell me on what brilliant strategy it was. I said, Paul, none of it matters because for the last year I've pushed it off of Taz, and the only leverage I have against you to get my money back is that belt. Eric Bischoff had offered me $250,000 to come drop it to Flair live on television, which I certainly wasn't amenable to, but the money sure as hell would have been nice, especially at that point.
Right.
And so he talked to me for 6 hours on the phone till daylight.
6 hours?
Yeah, just on and on and on, gushing about why he would never lie to me, why he'd never screw me, and everything else. So I get on the plane, and I fly to Orlando. The pay-per-view was at Kissimmee. And I land. I'm not even out of the airport yet. I'm coming out of the Orlando airport, getting onto the interstate. And he calls me, and he said, "I've got one question for you. Is this all about you doing a job, or is it about you doing a job to Taz?" And that pissed me off because, I was the guy that suggested Jewel McGillicuddy pin me. So I certainly didn't have trouble doing a job. And when he told me what hotel he was at, I reached over and grabbed the wheel and spun the car around right in the middle of the interstate, right before the toll booths.
Jeez.
Went back to the hotel and confronted him. And I made him sign a promissory note that he'd pay me the money personally. And of course, he never did. But I couldn't, in the end, when it came down to it, Steve, and as a businessman, you'll think I was an idiot for saying this, but I couldn't screw the ECW fans. They'd been too important to me, and quite frankly, I loved them. I loved ECW. So that's why I dropped the belt to Taz that night. And I respected Taz. I thought Taz would be a good champion, and I was always friends with Taz. I didn't want anybody to misconstrue it that I was pissed to go on a job or whatever. So rather than take the $250,000 from Bischoff, I went and dropped the belt that night with pretty good knowledge that I wasn't going to get my money.
So did you ever get your money?
No. To this day, I'm owed about $145,000 from ECW.
So is it ECW or is it Paul Lee? And is there any animosity or heat towards Paul Lee and yourself? And have you spoken since then?
No, I spoke to Paul one time in 2004. He called me. We had about a 2 or 3 hour talk on the phone, and haven't spoken since. I tried to call him last year. Do you remember Damian Farron that sold merchandise for ECW?
Barely.
Yeah, he was a really good kid and a real good friend of mine, dear friend of mine. 41 years old, passed away unexpectedly last July. So I called Paul to tell him, and I said, call me back, and he never did. So I'm assuming there's heat on that side of the equation. To me, I've reached a point, Steve, in life where, like I told you about how I try to cherish each day, where I realized that all that animosity I was holding in was dragging me down as much as anything. And so I've let it all of it go, because it wasn't making one bit of difference in my life, just making me stressed out. And I'm eternally thankful to Paul for the platform that he gave me to be the franchise. I'm eternally thankful for ECW. And although it didn't go well in the end, it was 7 damn good years of my career. So, on my end, there's no animosity whatsoever with Paul. I'm thankful for what he offered me.
But when you were running roughshod as a franchise, man, you were cutting some scathing promos involving yourself and Ric Flair. Shoot promos, working promos, combination of both. And was there animosity between you guys? Because you're about to make a return to WCW. I believe he's got the book.
Right. No, he didn't have the book at that time. Bischoff was, when I went back, Bischoff had it. Bischoff and Russo eventually.
So the promo shoot work?
Shoot. They started off as total shoot, because I sat back and I watched. First of all, I got into professional wrestling in large part to continue on with it because of Ric Flair. I was a huge Nature Boy fan, and I think you see a lot of similarities in the characters. He was, we all know he was the measuring stick of our business. And as a kid in the business, I'd gone to him on several occasions, but it was around the time, probably around 88, 89, when I was there, and I went to him and I prefaced it. I said, look, I know you're busy. If you don't have time, I totally understand. Now, I had at this point told him straight up what I thought of him, how much I idolized his career and that sort of thing. And I said, look, I know you're busy, and if you don't have time, I get it, but if you ever get a chance to watch one of my matches or whatever, could you give me some feedback? Because, Steve, there's a time in your career when you know how to execute the moves. You don't know when to or when not to execute them. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, it would be an honor, sir. And over the next several weeks, maybe months, in my head I'm thinking weeks, but it was probably some period of time, every night he'd give me generic feedback. Good heat, good fire, good selling, good this, good that, but never, hey, that drop toe hold spot didn't work. It was in the wrong place. Never anything specific. And if you remember back in those matches, back when we worked, I would always do that cross body block, that pop cross body block. And I've been thinking to myself, and I'm talking myself out of it. He's bullshitting you. You're not thinking right. He's like, why would he bullshit you? And so one night I went out and I intentionally didn't do that move that night, the cross body block that night. And I came back and he was giving me the feedback. I said, what about the cross body block, Rick? And he stopped and thought about it, this long, pregnant pause, and I was telling myself, please say you didn't see it. Please say you didn't see it. And he stopped and he looked at me and went, perfect, better than Steamboat. And when he said that, he went from being, 6 foot tall to being like a 2 foot tall guy to me. Just shriveled up to me. And, and then there were a lot of other instances, where I saw him use the politics, like when he put Pillman with him in that first Roman Pillman came in. That was to keep him close enough that he could keep him under him. And, and I saw Rick, manipulate the politics that I spoke about earlier. That kind of stuff where I saw guys like you going through there, guys like Zank, me, Pillman, and on and on and on and on and on. This long list of talented young lions that were coming into the sport. that were being kept under thumb. And let's face it, there wasn't one of us that ever would or could take the Nature Boy Ric Flair's spot.
No.
But it was a time for him to pass the torch. And
but don't get me wrong, we all thought we could, but in reality we could not.
Never. And so when I went to ECW and Paul said, say whatever you want, the reason I started shooting on him there in the first place sort of blew up in my face, because Flair, other than Charlotte, Philadelphia and Chicago, Flair was a god. He could walk on water.
Right.
So I thought if I go out and start shooting, because I was getting that sort of mixed in between, even though I was supposed to be a heel, I was getting that sort of golf clap, boo, not a real decisive either way. So I'll go out and I'll shit on Flair and get real heat.
Right.
And instead, people started holding up Flair's dead signs and stuff. It was not the reaction that I was going for. And after about a year of it, Paul kept trying to keep burying Flair, and I said, Paul, it's ridiculous. They know he's not coming, although they came close at one point. I said, he's not coming, so for me to keep talking about it just looks sort of foolish. And he wanted me to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And I was refusing. One night I walked back to the dressing room, and Bob Ryder had said, did you hear Flair fired back on you? And he'd been telling me this all day, and I didn't want to read it. Out of character. I don't give a shit what he had to say. I came back from the dressing room still in character. As I walked through the curtain, he hands me this piece of paper, and I take it from his hand, not even realizing what he handed me. And I go over and I sit down at my locker, and I look at the paper, and it's Flair's comments back to me, And so I had a pretty good laugh over that, and I went back to Bob. I said, okay, you ready to write my response? And it became the war of words. But look, truth be known, I look up to Rick and what he's accomplished in this business. Personally, as a human being, I'm sure I don't live up to somebody else's standard as a man or human being. And Rick fell far short in my head of what I had, the pedestal that I had him on.
Man, by the time you got back to WCW and you guys formed a revolution, and it's Chris Benoit, it's Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn.
Right.
Where was Chris Benoit's head at back in the day? I mean, because if what I know that guy, low-key, it took a lot to make him laugh. Most of the time he'd just grin. Hardest working guy in the locker room, or one of the hardest. We had a lot of hard workers. One of the hardest working guys, night in, night out, never took a night off. Extremely hard on himself, and was just out to set the world on fire in the form of professional wrestling. A guy who truly loved the business. And then, obviously years later, he went off the rails, and some bad things happened. And
Sure.
I don't mean that in a lighthearted fashion. I just don't want to specifically go into that. But so what was your relationship like with Chris?
I always saw Chris as a great guy, and like you said, an incredibly hard worker. And Chris, when I got the phone call about what happened with him and his family and the tragedy there, I was floored, and I kept thinking that there's got to be more to the story, because I can't tell you how many times how much hard as I used to be, and we'd be in a bar, me, him, and Dean and Perry, and some fan would say some stupid comment, and I'd be standing up to go after him, and Chris would be the one that would jump up first and take the fan and leave, or buy them a drink, or calm me down or whatever. I never saw Chris lose his temper. I never saw him go off.
Ever.
And so I was floored whenever I heard that, but what I've come to realize, Dean Malenko and I had a long talk about it after. Dean was probably the three, the one I was closest with, although I was close with all of them. Dean was the one I was closest with, and WWE was in town a couple of years back. We went out for a couple of drinks and some food afterwards, and I asked him, I said, what do you think happened there? He shrugged his shoulders. He said, only God and him will ever know, and then one of them's gone. So, who knows what goes on behind closed doors or what somebody's going through somebody's brain. I have a hard time wrapping my brain around it, because the person that I knew was so so opposite of that, and it was stunning. But who knows what in a fit of passion or anger or whatever could happen. Who knows? I mean, it's to this day I can't quantify it in my brain.
When you returned to WCW, your relationship with Bischoff, how was that? Guy offers you $250,000, drop a strap to Flair. You say no, stay in ECW. Ultimately, you end up in WCW. What were your thoughts on the way he was running the company, the direction he was taking the company, and how you were treated?
I can't say I was treated. I don't think they utilized my character anywhere near what it could have been,
no.
Especially as hard as it was coming out of ECW. But, I was at that point, the money that I was owed from ECW, and I had zero leverage. I'd been a big mouth for 7 years in ECW, burying north and south, that I didn't have a home to go to. It was ECW or nowhere, especially because I'd left Vince earlier. And Vince came to the table with a paltry offer, which I knew I wasn't going to take.
Right.
And at that point, I thought it was done, because I'd been pretty vocal about WCW and Flair and Hogan and Bischoff, and especially that whole Kliq. Mike Tenay called me and said, Dusty Rhodes was on the show last night. Did you hear her? I said, no. He said, you should listen to the archive. So I went back and listened to it, and Dusty Rhodes, who I'd had differences with, put me over, said he's the Ric Flair of his generation. And I felt compelled to call Dusty to thank him, because I always respected Dusty, and I did. And he said, do you mind if I bring your name up at a booking meeting? I said, no, sir. Do what you want. And within a matter of days, I had this incredible contract offer on my table that I never thought I would see, especially from WCW. And it really saved my financial life at that point for me and my family. So in that respect, I'll always be eternally thankful to Eric Bischoff and what he offered. But the reason he offered me that money was he wanted me versus Flair. He wanted me to, his exact words were, I want to be the one that brings that to television. So when I went in the first day, it wasn't the first day. I knew I was going to be busy for the next 3 years. So I took my wife on an extended cruise, and on the way back, we stopped in Florida for a couple of days. They were doing Nitro that coming Monday in Jacksonville. So on my own dime, I stayed in Florida and went down to the building that night. I left Carla back at the hotel, and I went down just to say hello to everybody and let them see that I'm eager to be coming to work and, just feel the landscape out. And Flair walked in right behind me, and it was almost written perfectly, And when he walked in, remember that little walkway you had to walk through to get into the back of the Jacksonville building? I was standing there talking to, Mikey Whipwreck was there, and Peaches and Sandman, and a bunch of people were standing around. Everybody goes dead quiet. And I could feel Flair. And one thing I've always said about Flair, Hogan, and Dusty, they have that charisma factor that you can feel them walk into a room. You have your back to the door, but you know they're there.
Right.
And as I turned around, I said, Rick, how you doing? And sure enough, he's standing right behind me. I said, how are you, sir? And, we shook hands, and I knew everybody was watching to see how this went. And so as he went to pull away, I went and let go of his hand. I said, Rick, I think you and I should talk. We got some things got to get clear. And he looked around and could realize, consummate politician that he is, looked around and realized it was not placed to say nothing opposite. And he said, give me 20 minutes, I'd sit down and talk to you. So I went down to the food service for about 45 minutes or so. I went back up, knocked on the door, and we went in, and first thing he did was jump over to his hand and said, I want to start by saying I'm sorry. And I said, Rick, look, I can't accept your apology. I know you're not sincere, but I'm not going to apologize either. And said, that's exactly why this can work. At that time, WWF was starting to slaughter them in the ratings, and I knew that there was enough interest in me and Flair in the shoot of it that we could help turn it around, and had it been utilized properly. And I asked him, I looked him in the eye, Rick, I'm going to ask you man to man, are you man enough to uphold your end of this angle? And he thought about it for a second. He said, yes, sir, I am. And I said, great, then we're going to make this company a lot of money. And found out right after that from Russo and others in the office that he started politicking from that first day to try to keep the angle from being elevated to where I thought it should have been and could have been. And if you look at the match, the one match that we had there, he had David involved and Sting, and I think Russo came down in a mask, and there was all kind of skullduggery in the match. But it certainly wasn't a match that Ric Flair and Shane Douglas could have had.
Why do you think it was?
I've been pretty vocal about Rick, and it said some pretty strong comments over the years. I'm sure he wasn't happy to be working with me. And quite frankly, I wasn't happy to be working with him either. But that's exactly the reason why I could have worked in that era that was coming out of ECW. ECW was now gone at that point, or certainly at the tail end. And WWE had started taking that ratings war back over, that something like that pushed properly the reality of it, that these two guys genuinely don't like each other. To me, where shoot fighting has gone is where wrestling should have always gone.
Right.
It should have gone more towards that reality edge. To me, we've allowed Dana White to take the reality part of our business and left us holding the cartoon back of it. And I think that Ric Flair and Shane Douglas could have been, part of the initial stage of that.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on Podcast One.
Love listening to this podcast? I love that you're here to listen. Do you ever wonder what it's like to create a listening experience like this week to week? Do your friends always tell you that you should have a podcast? Well, now is your chance. Our podcast network, PodcastOne, is looking for the next podcast star. Think it could be you? Enter the self-made podcast competition now to find out. All you have to do is visit launchpad1.com/selfmade for a chance to win a contract with PodcastOne, valued at over $100,000 in promotion and so much more. Enter now until September 3rd and tell all of your friends to listen and download. Go to launchpad1.com/selfmade to find out more, see official rules, and sign up for your chance to win. That's launchpad1.com/selfmade.
But it's always funny when, every now and then back in the day, two guys would have heat and they'd be working together. Oh, man, it's going to be a hell of a match. These guys got heat. Well, the match turned out to be not so great, if not shitty, because when you have shooting heat with somebody, it's hard to go out there and rip the roof off the building because you got shooting heat. And when you get in there and work, dude, I mean, it's a give and take, and it's communication and cooperation. So if you got a chip on your shoulder, or somebody else got a chip on your shoulder, or, someone's mad about doing the JOB, sometimes, matches just don't pan out for the obvious reasons. Going back to what you said about what the world of MMA or UFC has taken with regards to their storylines, has kind of left the pro wrestling world holding a cartoon bag. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, when I go back and I watch you versus Bret Hart, for instance, most of the ECW matches, Shawn versus Bret, Ric Flair versus Steamboat. When I watch any of those matches, what I believe to be iconic matches, I look at them, at no point am I watching it, certainly smart of the business, am I thinking to myself, this is a fake wrestling match. I'm hook, line, and sinker sucked into it. When Bret has you in the sharpshooter and you're bleeding like a stuck pig, the emotion that's draped on your face and on Bret's as he's wrenching it back into you, there's no cartoon to that. I mean, that's reality. That sucks you right in if you're a fan of our business. When you go and you see a kid today do 96 moves in 3 minutes, zip, 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 zip. I saw Gene Simmons. I'm a huge fan of Kisses,
Me too.
Gene Simmons did an interview one time talking about Bruce Kulick, and he said, he did this thing where he's on the fretboard, and he's like a bee you want to smack, Give me the cord that reaches in and grabs you by the balls.
Right.
That to me is what wrestling should be. It's that move, that emotion, that reality of it. When I was watching the Bruno Sammartino match as a kid, even though not smart to the business, like, for instance, when Zbyszko hit him with a chair. This is after my friends and I built the ring, so we were semi-smart to the business.
Right.
But at the bus stop that morning, we're all talking about, it looks like he was pissed at Bruno, so he really laid it in, like he didn't really like him.
Right.
And we were convincing ourselves to be marks, which we were. And when wrestling's done properly, that's where it should be done. And then, I think when you watch UFC, and I've seen probably 35, 40 cards over the years, I don't know the number, but quite a few of them, and I love them. They're great, the combination of action and everything. But to be honest with you, the last one I watched looked like the first one I ever watched.
Right.
There's different guys involved. I like the serial aspect of a good storyline and an angle that reaches in and grabs you by the gut, takes you along for that ride for a year while it settles in and ferments to the point that it's ready to blow the lid off the place. Then two great athletes go to the ring and deliver that great match. That to me is not a cartoon. You can call it whatever you want to. Fake, as you know, the word fake never sits well in our business. Preconceived storyline.
But you're probably a lot like me. I want to be. I still want to believe. Of course, I've been in the business since '89, but I'm still a fan, and I still like watching the guys and gals out there do their stuff. But I want it presented to me in a serious fashion, the exact same fashion that it's always been presented. But, I mean, we're with current technology, we're with the modern production values. I dig all that. but still treat it like a shoot, dude. And if you treated it like a shoot, and then the guys and gals go out there and do their thing accordingly, hey, back off a little bit. I know how things have evolved and sped up, and to your point in several of the interviews that you've given, and I recognize too, I think the talent in the ring are better athletes than we were back in our day, as things are in every sport. But just present it to me, knock off that sugar coating. You ain't got to go back to ECW level with barbed wire and bullshit. You don't got to go back to Attitude Era with all the sexual overtones and cussing, but just present it to me in a shoot fashion. Because, you know, when I go see Tom Cruise beat up a bunch of people in Mission Impossible 17, you know, I could suspend my disbelief because I'm going to dig the movie. So let me do that with pro wrestling. That's my only thing that I just wish they would go back to. And I ain't, again, I'm not bitter. I feel for the guys and gals in the ring that they don't have the creative freedom to do the things we did back then. But just me being selfish as a fan, that's how I want it presented to me.
Sure. Well, you know, see, I couldn't put it better. The way I always tell people is it has to allow me to suspend my disbelief. When I sit down and watch it, if I see the guys that's going, like, for instance, like, certainly nothing against the luchadors. I think it's phenomenal what they do. But if I tap you on the shoulder, why would you run 20 feet to that rope, bounce off, and then run 20 feet back and let me clothesline you? It's not believable to me.
Right.
But if like how Benoit used to Irish whip somebody, every vein and muscle in his body popping out, that looks real.
Right.
I can suspend my belief to watch that and get into that. If you can't suspend the disbelief, and it doesn't matter how athletic it is or impressive it is with all the new technology, it's just not going to grab you by the balls. And the one question I always have is, what would these kids be doing if they were brought in the way you were brought in, the way I was brought in? What kind of magic would they be creating with that athleticism?
Oh, it'd be incredible. But just, put the believability back in it. And, and one of the things also, Shane, because you came up in a talent-rich era, whatever territory you were in there fortunate enough to be with very established vets and with some great hands in the ring. So, when you looked at the product that was in the ring, and I watched one of your interviews, and you said, hey, go back to 75 through 85 and watch all that stuff, a brief period in the early 90s, some of that stuff. And I agree with you. I mean, just the way the stuff that was going on in the ring back then with regards to work was off the charts. All of a sudden, you give those guys the athletic ability that these guys have these days, and that's where we should be now with that same style, but with the athleticism that the youth of today are bringing to the squared circle. But they're just, I go back, I got a cardio machine in my garage, and when I do cardio, I put in a DVD or something. My favorite stuff is to watch Mid-South in the mid-'80s, Power Pro, whatever you want to call it, UWF, NWA, mid-'80s, all that stuff, some early Attitude Era stuff, not my stuff, just some of the other guys. But and then some of the AWA stuff from, I guess, late 70s when Bockwinkel, or I'll put something maybe from Japan, and although I'm not really a big fan of an overdose of strong style, if I put in something with Brody Hansen or Funks, Gordy, Williams, I dig that. But I like the American style storytelling. But I always go back to those are my years of saying, especially when you got the Rock and Roll in the Midnight and the Andersons and all those cats lighting it up. I mean, it really doesn't get any better than that for me.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not taking a thing away from the kids today. I was doing a couple of years ago down in Crossfire. Pittsburgh boy was running some shows down in a little territory down in Tennessee, and there were about 5 or 6 WWE guys in and girls. And he wanted me to run the promo room for him that day. He was busy doing some other stuff, and he wanted a 60-second generic and 2 real simple, no length, just 2 little snippets. Hey, this is the franchise Shane Douglas. I really dig Crossfire Wrestling. This is the franchise Shane Douglas. I'm a proud supporter of Make-A-Wish, Middle Tennessee. Very simple. I thought, I brought the WWE guys in first because I thought they're going to knock this out in no time at all. The local kids will have trouble. And it was the exact opposite way around, and then it struck me. They're used to reading off a teleprompter. they don't know how to look into that lens and say, boom, you at home, listen to me, 'cause I'm going to grab you by the balls. You're right. We grew up at a time in the business where, I remember sitting in the dressing room looking around and thinking, there's Jake Roberts over there, Harley Race over there, Ric Flair right there, Ricky Steamboat over there. And, my God, how could you not learn from watching these guys? Just sit back and pay attention.
Speaking of a promo and going back to your ECW days, when you really, got honed in and zeroed in, what was your preparation for a promo? Because, you had guys, Raven was knocking them out of the park, Sandman could deliver what he did. Of course, Mick Cactus, whatever you want to call him, has always been off the chart. And then you got in the zone. And, it was funny because everybody had that different promo, and I cut my little promo at about 4:30 in the morning that one night for about 7 minutes, and with a little direction to Paul Lee. And Mick would cut that layered, multifaceted, complex promo, which always came back full circle. He's one of the rare guys to do that. And yours was straightforward, venom, talk, trash talk, and matter of fact, and intelligently presented, but just full of fucking venom. What was your prep for a promo? What was your thought process? Were you just an ad-lib guy? Hey, let me just start on this motherfucker and let it go? Or did you put some thought into it?
I really put thought into it other than like 2 or 3 bullet points.
Right.
I would think to myself, okay, I got to hit A, B, and C. And I wouldn't even go over those. I'd make sure I had them in my head as A, B, and C, that I didn't put C before A or whatever. And then I would just go and, it would take, usually it was 1 or 2 takes, but there were times when I, couldn't quite get it wrapped up together or couldn't find my way out of it in the proper way to put the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. But for the large part, I didn't overthink it, because to me then, I'd done that a couple times. And, I don't know how you were, but I would have dreams at times, and I was at a tablet next to the bed of something I wanted to say or a move I wanted to try or whatever. And when I would do that, I would go back and watch it, and I'd see it replay, and I'd go, shit, it looks like I'm trying to remember a line. And I never wanted that. I always wanted the spontaneity and the believability of it. And to get there, I thought you had to be more spontaneous with it. And back to the arena, what I think worked there best for me was the fans would get involved. Like the night that I threw the belt down, and I was naming names from the NWA, and I intentionally didn't go out and remember like 10 names. I just wanted to go out there and off the top of my head. But I was winded and blown up, and the building was hotter than hell that night. And I was trying to remember names, and I went blank. And so the fans started, and Ricky Steamboat, and it allowed them organically to come into it. So it was a conversation with me doing a promo in the audience that I think made it work. And looking back on it now, it looks special, but it was it really was thankful to the fans that they helped me out, because I was blank. I'd lost my thought on who I wanted to mention.
You like a live promo better, or you like doing stuff in the studio?
Live. I like the energy from the audience. How about you?
Oh, man, I'm a live guy. I remember when I came back from my neck surgery, I had my neck fused up. Missed 2000. I don't know, I was gone 12, 15 months, whatever it was. And when I'd come back, the system had changed. This is when they kind of had the quote-unquote scripted promos. And you kind of just go over them a few times. And before I keep telling my story, you're talking about a teleprompter. Are they reading a teleprompter these days?
Yeah, that's what we had an executive producer had gone to a couple WWE events, and he asked me what that was for, and he said that he could see the words, and I said, well, the only thing I could imagine it being was that when he described it to me, a guy being in the ring telling a promo to the hard cam, and big piece of plexiglass up under the hard cam, they're teleprompting the in-rings now. So. Oh,
man, Jesus Christ. So going back to I didn't know that. Going back to my story, so there we were. He's coming back and going to a room with Vince, and he goes, Steve, let's go over our promo. And all of a sudden, someone had handed me a piece of paper, and I was like, wow, this is different. And so I would start going over my promo with Vince, and this is 30, 45 minutes before we're about to go out on live TV. And, I had a long history of working with Vince McMahon, and our chemistry is off the charts, man. And me and him in the ring together were money. So anyway, I go in there and I start reading it, and okay, Vince, I cannot wait to get you in the ring, because when I do, I'm going to beat you to within an inch of it. And I'd be reading it like that. And he'd look at me and go, God damn it, Steve, give me your A promo. I said, Vince, I said, I'm going to give you my A promo out there in the ring. I said, I can't give you shit right here because ain't no people in this room. And it just doesn't feel right. And so, I'm going to give it to you one time. And when I do, I guarantee you every son of a bitch in the arena is going to feel it because it's going to be real, and I'm going to mean every single word I say. So I always hated that, and it just takes the spontaneity out of it. And, every now and then, I mean, depending on how long you'd been out on the road, I mean, you get off point every here and there, but, I mean, Stone Cold pretty much delivered the facts as they were, straight to the point. So it wasn't like I really need to go out there and recite a soliloquy to try to draw some money and put asses in seats. And when someone's talking to you, just like you're listening to me and I'm listening to you, I just listen to someone and respond accordingly. Boy, that really makes it a lot easier than having to, the way, a lot of things go down these days. One guy's got the microphone and the other guy's talking, and he'll never put the microphone up to his face to cut the person off because he's not supposed to. So to answer your question and not to beleaguer the process of what's going on today or to beat a dead horse, man, dude, just let me fly. Go out there and do it live. I know where we're going. I sucked ass as a Hollywood blonde and always gave Brian Pillman credit for when we were riding down the roads. He was reading vocabulary books, trying to bring up his vocabulary. And Brian was a smart guy to begin with. And all of a sudden, he just starts, he hadn't quite developed his promo yet, but if you put a stick in front of him, he started just going. And I'm trying to follow that. So that was kind of like, hey, man, I better do something to keep up with this cat, or I'm going to look like a deaf mute out here, and they're never going to give me any mic time. And so when Paul Lee finally just gave me that platform, and I was able to vent and realize at that point that I could be, emotional and let everything hang out, so to speak. But it almost goes like part and parcel with, you said it took you about 7.5 years to really feel comfortable in the ring. It took me about that same time, Shane, but also my first few years in WCW, I can rarely remember smiling in the ring or feeling at ease because I was so competitive and I was learning the mechanics of the business. The task at hand was to learn everything, so I didn't know that you were allowed to have fun. And so, that's half of working, is having fun. It don't mean you're shucking and jiving and laughing and joking out there. It just means you can actually enjoy the process, and the more you're enjoying it, the more organic the match is going to be. And like I said, it's relaxation and enjoying the moment and being in the moment, not having to think 16 steps down the road because you're following an ABC formula and listening to the crowd calling it on the go.
Absolutely. What I remember best about your ECW promos, because I left right towards the tail end, you were in there a very short time, I think, and then I left to go to WWF. But I was to stay watching the show, and what I remember thinking was, I was very familiar with your promos as a Hollywood blonde and as Steve Austin, Stony Steve Austin. But when I sat back and watched the promos you were doing the imitations and everything, I thought, man, he's coming out of his skin. It's fantastic. You can see like a metamorphosis going on in that. Really looked entertaining and fun, and it was different. In ECW, it was different than anything anybody else had been doing.
Man, are you back in your car now?
Yes. All
right, I'm talking to Shane Douglas. He's on the move. Before we let Shane go, Shane, you stopped over briefly in TNA. What was your experience like there? Did you not fit in?
No, I fit in pretty well. I was head of talent relations there. I was doing the backstage promos. My experience with TNA was that it was Dixie didn't want to hear what we had to say. She would like Vince Russo would come and deliver up some idea for TVs. And she would come to the green room and run them by me and ask me my thoughts, and I would tell her, if you do that, you're going to have to turn this kid heel, and I explain it to her, because this, and this, and she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't, they wouldn't pay attention, she wouldn't make the changes. And then 2 weeks later, she'd come back and say, you were right, the last time you were right, now the fans are bitching because they say you should be a heel, and, how do we fix it? And so you'd give her that advice, and she wouldn't take it. This went on for 5.5 years. And it got to the point where I'd go to production meetings and I'd sit there and play tic-tac-toe on the paper on the table with Terry Taylor sitting next to me because I knew they didn't give a damn what we had to say. The first night I met Dixie, and first of all, I think Dixie's a very nice lady. But if I'm digging ditches, and Steve Austin has dug ditches for 35 years, I don't care how many books I've read about digging ditches. I'm going to listen to what Steve Austin can tell me, because my guess is he probably knows more than those books.
Right.
And same applies with wrestling. And I never saw Dixie apply with anybody from the wrestling side of it. Terry Taylor, me, any of the people. Dusty, when Dusty came in, he was banging his head against the wall. She asked me the first night she met me, when Panda first started investing. She pulled me down to the green room and recited my resume to me, as if I didn't know it. And she said, if I were to ask you for one piece of advice, as my father starts on this adventure, what would it be? And I said, Dix, I could probably give you a million pieces of advice. And I'm buying time, thinking in the back of my head, and we're bullshitting for about 20 minutes. And it finally struck me. I said, if I had to boil it down to one piece, Dixie, one piece of advice, I would say to in no way, shape, or form try to engage or challenge Vince McMahon. Don't try to be WWF 2 or WWF Light or WWF Junior. Be TNA, be the Uncola, be different than him.
Right.
Grab fans. And where I made my mistake was I said, like ECW did, we went for the 18 to 49 male and we dominated them. Her response to me was, why would we want to copy ECW? After all, they failed. And right as she said that, the monitor behind me, they had started the show. I don't know who was in the ring or what they did, but the fans started chanting ECW. So I stepped back like out of the line of view, and I looked at the monitor, and I looked back at her like, I hope you're getting this, Dixie. And she never got it.
Right.
So that was the point. And it was very difficult. You know, Panda Energy has sunk close to $500 million, $478 million into TNA.
How do you get all these figures?
Well, I know people in the office, and they've recently gone public with that.
Right.
I had it as 476. I was wrong. It was 478. And that's not including the millions that Panda put in, because Panda was paying Hogan and Mick and Sting and Kurt Angle and all those guys. So well over $500 million. And I'm sorry, you know, you should have a shitload more to show for it than that.
So, you know, they took care of you, so to speak, when you were going through your rehab process.
Yes.
And then you didn't have a spot to come back to when you came back. So your overall thoughts on where they are now?
When I came back, first of all, Dixie had promised me that she would pay me while I was off, which she didn't. I came home from the hospital to a stack full of bills. And when I called her to ask her that, she sort of mumbled under her breath. Now, Dixie, when she talks on the phone, talks like you and I are doing, very forthrightly and very well spoken. When I said, Dixie, you know, what happened to the pay? You know, there's no pay. I can't pay my bills. And she mumbled under her breath, no, I never told you that. And, you know, so there was a lot of tension over that. But the first day I got back, she asked me if I wanted to go public or not, and I told her that I did, and I explained earlier why. And I sat down with Ross Foreman in a 4-hour interview for TNA Online. And within a matter of maybe a month or two after, it was right at Christmas time, 2 weeks before Christmas, they had a TV tape, and Bob Ryder called me up and said they didn't need me in. And, you know, it sat wrong with me, Steve, because the one thing that Dixie and I always spoke about was our kids. And here we are 2 weeks before Christmas, and you know, she's letting me go without even a call to say thank you or whatever. You know, to me, that's not the way you do business.
Right. So now, any hard feelings? It is what it is. Bygones are bygones. You're in that good zone now.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you know, after TNA, I mean, I to be honest with you, if I could write the magic script right now I would say that I want to see TNA get red hot. I want to see Vince get red hot again. I want to see the independents get red hot, because we were the people that fell off of the highest and the higher heights went to 50 million, and instead we brought 3 to sometimes 5 million fans a week. And I think we get it back, because the rising tide rises all. The fans went out. There's no loser in that scenario, but unfortunately, the way the wrestling is going right now, you know, we're seeing this downside to where it certainly appears as though the tide's not going to rise. But I'd love to see TNA get red hot again.
Hey, man, I was watching some of your interviews before I was going to talk to you. Do you care to talk about any kind of future wrestling endeavor that you might be part of?
Well, yeah, I can't say a whole lot just now, but I spoke to you a little bit about it the other day on the phone. I've been working on something for the last 16 months now. After doing Pro Wrestlers versus Zombies, I was fortunate enough to meet a businessman that is very interested in doing something new in professional wrestling. And, we look to making the announcement here very soon. And I'd love to do it, come on your show after we've made the announcement and give more on it. But just ask the fans to stay tuned either to my Twitter account, franchise SD, hashtag franchise SD or franchise fan site to see what's going to be. Because we're making the announcement very soon. We're just making sure that we get all the pieces of the puzzle in place before we make the announcement, so that we don't make an announcement and have to, delay like some others have had to have done. But hopefully we're going to be seeing something very different very soon with wrestling getting back to what we spoke about a few minutes ago, getting it back to wrestling to where we can suspend that belief and watch the athleticism of these guys in a storyline that makes sense.
Hey, man, well, if and when the time comes, man, I'd love to talk to you again, and let's stay in touch on a personal level anyway. It was great catching up to you for the past, and these podcasts are going to go for probably 2 weeks on the Unleashed show. And it was great talking to you, and I'm glad you're in such a good place right now with everything that you've been through. I've always enjoyed the shit out of working with you, and I've enjoyed watching you run an ECW, and it's finally good after all these years to hook back up with you. So safe travels down the road, and thank you for being part of the show.
Hey, Steve, I appreciate it, man. It's always great to talk to you and catch back up, man. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
This has been a Podcast One production. Download new episodes of The Steve Austin Show every Tuesday at PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
Pluto TV is playing the biggest movies every night this summer for free. Watch hit movies like The Matrix, G.I. Joe Retaliation, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Scary Movie, Runaway Bride, and more all summer long. Check out the biggest stars like The Rock, Keanu Reeves, Tom Cruise, Julia Roberts, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and more. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of free TV channels in English and Spanish featuring TV shows, news, sports, comedy, and more, all for free. Download the free Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device, including Android and Apple smartphones. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.
Hey guys, Jay Cutler. Started a new podcast called Uncut with Jay Cutler. Most of you know me from the NFL, some of you have seen me on Instagram, and some of you know me from the reality TV world. Each week I'm taking you along with me as we discuss football, trending topics, and whatever's going on in my life each week. I'm bringing along people that are special in my life. Former teammates, friends, and some new people that I like and respect. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Podcasting? I think I'm doing this right. Can't wait to get started with you. Go subscribe now. Uncut with Jay Cutler, Apple Podcasts, Podcast One, and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.